John is the latest gospel to be written. And because of that, the early church is in its second and third generation of people after Jesus' death. So the writer does not give us a lot of details in this passage or in any passage in the John. He's trying to understand or getting the readers to understand what it is at a higher level, at a theological level. They're reflecting together on who was this Jesus and what did it mean for us today. He's going for a vision of transformation, a transformed life, but he's using metaphors and symbols. And that's why John is very different from the first three Gospels. It's deeper, all right, and not as, what we say, historic. So we're going to turn today to a metaphor that he uses. He writes, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Now, for those who are more literal-minded, this is utter nonsense. And the scripture tells us that those around him thought it was gibberish as well. And they began to complain. Not only was Jesus not bread, whatever that meant, but they knew Joseph and his mother. Okay, so they knew what was going on. And so the words that he's using doesn't quite get it with the audience members. Now, so much for using words to describe a spiritual reality, which is what sermons are, which is why many of them go over your head. Because you can't really explain spirituality, you have to live it. Okay? So this is a doorway. Now, as a child, I thought literally, as all children do. And I tried to figure out this metaphor as well. The communion table was magical and mystical, the highlight of the worship, and I could not wait until I was baptized because then I would be allowed to participate as well. Now, making bread was an art form in my dad's family, and our family favorite was homemade cinnamon rolls. Walking into my grandmother's house when bread dough was rising was like walking into heaven itself. Now, my Uncle Arlie worked at the Sally Ann Bakery on the line that churned out cartfuls of white bread. Now, his clothes always smelled like bread, fresh bread, and it was a good smell. On Saturdays, when we went into town to buy groceries from the farm, we would smell the Sally Ann Bakery throughout town. And as my mom went inside the bakery to make her purchase, regardless of the temperature, all four of us kids would roll down all the windows and stick our heads out and take in deep gulpfuls of breath, breathing in that smell of bread. Bread and heaven, it just seemed to fit together. It was, however, a mystery as to why church people called those tiny wafers at church bread. It didn't look like bread. It didn't smell like Sally Ann Bakery. Further, unlike at home in my church, women never served this bread and they never baked this bread. And who knew what it tasted like? It was only for grown-ups. On most Sundays, my family would gather and be flanked on both sides of the pew by my parents on the second floor. That was not because it was our pew, it was because we were always late to church, and that was the only one that was available. So, on this Sunday, my dad was once again at the altar as an elder, and he would remain seated there through the rest of the communion service as the other men served the congregation. We were surrounded by serious expressions and closed eyes, silence, prayer, quiet time, wiggling stopped. We were as silent as the church mice in the corners. We watched as the trays were slowly passed down to the adults. Special bread was coming down the aisles, and it would be passed on every pew. Now, with my dad up here at the altar, our pew was taken up, 3/4 of it, with my family. And then on the end was a single woman sitting by herself. Now, as the deacon started serving across the aisle, we watched this passing of the tray. And then as they came to our row, my mom partook ever so reverently, as she always did. And then, when my brothers realized that with my dad being unavailable, my mom would need help to pass the tray down the row to the woman at the end. Seeing our brother's helpfulness, we all rushed to assist him, and in our hurry to participate in this special grown-up time, one of us jostled my mother's arm, and that's all it took. In an instant, the brass communion plate was flying through the air, banging on the pew in front of us like a Chinese gong. Then, bouncing several times before rolling in ever smaller circles, it finally ended upside down on the floor with a loud splat, sounding like Jesus' body had been hit in the stomach. It lay there lifeless, gutted of its sacred contents. In that split second, without planning or coordination, yet moving as one, all four of us kids and 8 hands scrambled to the floor in a feeding frenzy, grabbing handfuls of communion wafers and shoving them into our mouths as fast as we could. Besides, nobody wanted them because it was a dirty floor, right? We love bread. Grandmother's bread, homemade cinnamon rolls, freshly baked Sally Ann bakery bread. This was our chance to eat special bread, blessed by God, bread of Jesus. Feed me till I ain't going to be hungry anymore kind of bread. Oh, at last I might understand if I could just taste those crackers. And just as quickly as the wafers entered my mouth, we spit them out in horror, in shock, in disbelief. The reality, the anticipation shifted to reality. Cardboard. Now, I had been suspicious of that square shape and the fact that it didn't smell like bread, but now it was obvious to me this could not be bread. It was impossible. It was terrible. Chastened by our unexpected revelation, our hopes of understanding this Christian mystery were shattered. Bread of life is what I've been promised, and all I got was more mystery. So how do we convey the bread of life as a symbol to those around us? Now, a seminary professor of Chicago Theological Seminary before my time, Ross Snyder, talked of what he called lived moments. Lived moments were sacred times when God or mystery or love just crashes into our lives, and suddenly we see things and we feel things that maybe we knew, but we didn't know that we knew. It's deep. It's deep. It grips us. It's when love touches us. And it's difficult to put it into words oftentimes, and oftentimes we don't. We don't tell people this. But we all have sacred lived moments. We also experience the divine when we become deeply aware of the social justice issues and ally ourselves in the work for justice with other people, with the least of these. Having faith is never about coming to church. I expect you here next week anyway, but it's not about that. It's about understanding that God will break into, does break into, always has broken into our lives and given us little touches, little flavors of sacred lived moments. Sometimes we see them, most times we don't. But when we work with others, the least of these, we may find more of them. So, when I hear the truth of a woman who has spent her life as a sex worker, because she has no skills, she has no job experience to do anything else, and no money to pay for her education or job training, then I have a deeper understanding of truth of injustice in her life that's driven by a sex-fearful society that hurts women, poor women. And I know God is calling me to help her survive. When I hear the truth of a dark-skinned friend telling me her vacation story of a white man displaying his gun in a holster and stalking her for the sole purpose of intimidation, I know the truth of her experience of profound injustice of white privilege. These women's stories become my story. When I participate in their truth about race and poverty and erotophobia, I know truth in a different way. One only knows truth as one participates in truth, Dr. Snyder would say. I'm going to repeat that. One only knows truth as one participates in truth. You can't just sit there and let God hit you. You have to get involved with the work. Okay? Now, that work may also be appreciating the environment and the sunsets and so forth as well. But you have to get involved and open our eyes. So, as progressive people of faith, we can't solve all the problems of injustice of the world. It's too great. We have no quick and easy or ready-made answers, unlike some of our Christian brothers and sisters. But we are people who eat the bread of life, who are nourished by this bread, and then go into the world to leave a trace of Jesus behind us. That's the focus of the ministry of our world. It does not matter your age, it does not matter your wealth or your status, for we all have access to these lived moments when we open ourselves to love and do the work. We are to live in love, the Bible says. And when we do, we become the beacons in the deepest shadows of the night, the candle on the highest hillside, and the saltiest salt for a world that has lost its savor. Now, I will remind you that we are called to be, not to believe. Remember, as I indicated in another sermon, the writer of the book of John uses the word believe compulsively. He uses it 84 times. Mark uses it 17, Luke 9, and Matthew 7. So belief is really important to John. But remember, the word translated belief is a mistranslation. The Greek word that it gets translated belief doesn't have an English equivalent. But it does not mean in the head. It's not memorizing Bible. It's not believing fanciful stories that deny science, okay? I'm quoting Diana Bass, theologian, in her book Christianity After Religion. She writes, in early English usage, you could not hold, claim, or possess a belief about God, but you could cherish, love, trust in, or devote yourself to God. So we don't have an English word for the Greek equivalent verb, but what it means is to beloved. Those who belove will never be thirsty. It is to faith as a verb. Okay? Real different understanding. And that's completely consistent with John, who is writing at this bigger symbolic level. He's saying to be loved with all of one's being, and then you will not be thirsty. So, when we eat of this bread, when we beloved this Jesus, we will never be hungry again, not for earthly goods or high status or acceptance of others. For this is not about crackers and juice at the communion table. It's not about Bible verses and getting to heaven. It is to know this spiritual reality. Love comes down from heaven, and whoever partakes of this love, whoever eats of this reality, whoever responds with one's heart will never die. Like most people, my images of Jesus was as a man until I discovered Christa, a sculpture that was done by Edwina Sandys. Jesus as a nude female on a cross. This image, when first displayed at St. John of the Cathedral in New York City, created a scandal for some people, as you might imagine. And I framed it and put it in my campus ministry, and it provoked a lot of conversations from the students as well. I had, however, found a Jesus that depicted my lived experience. A nude female body cannot hide her sexuality. This kind of humiliation I understood in my bones. There she hangs in full view, perhaps shamefully so, to be gawked at by bystanders who do not understand sexual suffering. A crucified woman. Yes, this is God in the flesh, and it is my story as a woman. This Jesus understands my suffering as a woman and suffers with me, comforting me. Now, this understanding became a lived moment for me 50 years after the communion debacle, by the way, at the Episcopal Cathedral in Philadelphia in 1999, at the 25th anniversary of the ordination of the illegal ordination of 11 women to the priesthood. I watched as 9 of the original 11 pioneer women, all robed in brightly colored styles of vestment, stood and walked to the altar table. Each wore an alb, a special sacramental vestment that covers the cleric's robes and mimics an apron. Standing in a line, side by side, they lift their arms in invitation and recite the words of institution from the Gospels that state Jesus' words to his disciples before the Passover meal. I sit in the pew and I hear, "Come, eat, drink, be filled. The feast is ready for the people of God." And suddenly I am transported back to my childhood. Grandmother wore aprons as she called us to kitchen for a dinner of chicken and noodles dripping over mashed potatoes. "Dinner's ready, come and get it." It was comfort food. Grandma B always wore aprons when she called us to the supper table to eat chocolate pudding with soda crackers in it, and if we wanted some fresh warm milk straight from the cow. "Come and get it, come and eat." Words of welcome. It was always women who wore aprons and who presided over our table at home. Aprons mean food has been prepared and served by women. And now I remember Welch's grape juice and tiny wafer crackers in a brass plate crashing to the floor under the second pew. Oh, how we wanted to understand that special table ritual. I understand now what I could not as a child. And as the female priest raised the bread in the air, I see God in them, in us, with us, through us. God in the flesh, becoming God in us, in our flesh. Wearing sacred aprons, they extend the maternal call to all her beloved children to come and eat at this table. Nobody goes hungry when love is present. Women will see to that, grandmothers, mothers, sisters. Women whose bodies birth and bleed, whose arms caress and hold, as Edwina Sandys' Christa reveals. Even though regularly crucified, still they love. Still we love. Inviting all. Love is expressed in this food. Love is what we become when we partake of it. At this table, we know what it is to be spiritual in a human body. It is to love. Love is not vague. It is the flesh that sits at the welcome table at Passover. It hosts the marginalized. It welcomes the despised. It calls out the injustice of a world of empire. This love, this bread, is about beloving. We eat the beloved and we become the beloved. And so, my beloved, today, tomorrow, and this week, beloved in the name of Jesus. For by participating in this truth, we find our own truth. When we find these lived moments, we know what we didn't know that we knew. that love is all that matters and is all that is. And when we live in love as one, we may leave traces of Jesus behind